Ladies and gentlemen, they don't scream, they don't slam doors, they simply start telling a story, but you're not the one telling it. And in their version, you're not misunderstood. You're the problem. You hear pieces of it from others, twisted and edited, and you start realizing this isn't just hurt. This is a quiet campaign to erase your side of the truth. You walk into the room and something is off, so off that your body registers it before your brain can name it. A weight, a subtle tension, maybe even a chill. The silence isn't peaceful, it isn't shared, it's directed. You scan the room, your heart a few seconds behind your steps, trying to read what you're feeling. And there it is, no eye contact. Not even an attempt, no brief glance of recognition, no softening in the face, nothing. Just a carefully curated absence. What hurts the most in that moment isn't the silence. It's what the silence means. We like to tell ourselves that silence is neutral, that it can be polite, that it can be space, giving. But this kind of silence isn't born from respect or stillness. It's born from something harder, darker, and more personal. It's not that they don't know you're there. It's that they do, and they're choosing not to show it. This is not conflict avoidance. This is conflict disguised. When someone withholds even the smallest gestures of connection, eye contact, acknowledgement, presence, it's rarely accidental. It's often precise, calculated, and deeply emotional. The worst kind of distance isn't the one that shows up with slammed doors or screaming voices. It's the one that shows up in the lack of everything. A withdrawal so intentional, it leaves no room for misunderstanding. In healthy relationships, even during tough times, we make efforts to stay emotionally present. Even when we're upset, there's a mutual understanding that connection is still possible, that the thread hasn't snapped. But when someone begins to consistently avoid looking at you, engaging with you, or even allowing you to exist in their awareness, what they're often communicating is this: you are no longer worth my attention. That is not just cold, it is violent in its own quiet way. Avoidance becomes a tool, not to protect feelings, but to harm them. And the scariest part, it's so subtle that you begin to question yourself. Maybe they're just busy. Maybe they're tired. Maybe it's in your head, but your body knows better. It senses rejection long before your mind can put the pieces together. The lack of eye contact becomes a form of emotional starvation. You're not just being ignored, you're being erased. This kind of behavior is often rooted in contempt. Contempt is more than dislike, it's the belief that someone is beneath you. And when a person feels contempt, they rarely shout it from rooftops. They whisper it through their absence. They let you feel the void they leave behind. They let the emptiness do the talking. Brené Brown once described contempt as the deathbed of connection. The final stage before disconnection becomes irreversible. Because where empathy seeks to understand, contempt seeks to dismiss. And the thing is, we often miss the red flags because the world doesn't warn us about subtle cruelty. We're taught to look out for yelling, insults, dramatic exits, but the deeper injuries come in the quiet, in the skipped greeting, in the turned head, in the way they acknowledge everyone in the room except you, in the way they pretend not to notice your presence but stiffen when you come near. That's not indifference. That's strategy, and that strategy often speaks of hatred that the person can't say out loud but can still show unmistakably. What makes it worse is how invisible it becomes to everyone else. They still say your name in conversations. They still smile around others. They may even defend you when necessary. But when you're alone in the same space, they give you nothing. It's like the relationship died quietly in the middle of the night, and no one else noticed but you. The human nervous system is built for connection. We need eye contact, acknowledgement, presence. It's hardwired into us as survival tools. That's why infants look for their mother's gaze, why lovers search for each other's eyes in crowded rooms, why friends feel hurt when you don't look up from your phone. It's not needy, it's human, so when someone deliberately deprives you of that, it's more than a cold shoulder. It's emotional neglect with intent. So what do you do when someone's silence is that loud, when their gaze skips over you like your air? You grieve first. You let yourself name the loss because something was there and now it's gone. You were once safe in their presence and now you're not even seen. You stop pretending it doesn't hurt. You stop shrinking to make sense of their distance. Then you ask yourself the harder questions. Is this someone I want to keep chasing? Am I willing to keep showing up in a space where I am consistently invisible? Because at some point, the most courageous thing you can do is stop fighting to be seen by someone who refuses to look. And maybe, just maybe, you stop showing up in places where your presence is a problem. You reclaim your energy. You reclaim your worth, and you remind yourself, silence doesn't always mean peace. Sometimes it's a message, and sometimes that message says more about them than it ever did about you. There's a strange moment that happens when you're vulnerable in front of someone and they respond not with compassion, but with amusement. You're trying to be real, maybe even raw, and they laugh. Not the kind of laughter that diffuses tension or brings you closer, but a sharp, dismissive laugh that cuts through your courage. It's a laugh that tells you your feelings are inconvenient, embarrassing, or worse, ridiculous. And suddenly, what felt brave now feels exposed. What felt human now feels foolish. This is one of the most disorienting forms of emotional rejection, and it can go unnoticed by everyone else. Because from the outside, it might look like teasing or a joke, but you feel it differently. You know what you were offering. You know what you needed in that moment. And when that need is met with sarcasm, eye rolls, or a smug chuckle, you realize something quietly painful. This person isn't here to understand you. They're here to stay above you. You might think it was a one-time thing. You convince yourself they didn't mean it, but then it happens again. Another time when you open up about something that hurt, something that didn't go right, and instead of a kind word or even simple presence, you get a comment. Wow, you're so dramatic. That's what you were upset about. Maybe you should learn to take a joke. It's not always what they say, it's how they say it. It's the smirk behind the words, the way they tilt their head, how they glance at others for shared laughter. When someone repeatedly meets your vulnerability with mockery or coldness, it's no longer a misunderstanding. It's a message, and that message says, your feelings make me uncomfortable, and instead of sitting with that, I'm going to make you feel small. That's not just unkind. That's emotional cruelty. What's even more damaging is how it reshapes you over time. You start to self-edit. You stop sharing the things that matter. You don't tell them when you've had a bad day or when you feel uncertain. You learn to only show them the strong, polished, filtered parts of you. You keep your humor safe and self-deprecating. You avoid real joy, too, because you know it won't be received. If something great happens, you hesitate to celebrate. If you succeed, you downplay it. Because when someone resents your happiness or downplays your pain, they make every emotion feel risky. And this is where the betrayal becomes layered, because it's not just about the moments when you're hurt. It's about all the moments you start to hide. You begin to live in a relationship that feels like walking on emotional eggshells. One false step, and your feelings will be turned into content for their amusement. One honest word, and suddenly you're too sensitive. In healthy relationships, laughter builds connection. It creates safety, It helps us hold joy and pain together, but in toxic dynamics, laughter becomes a shield. It's used to deflect intimacy, to avoid responsibility, to reject emotion without having to say it directly. And for the person on the receiving end, it's deeply isolating. You're in the same room, maybe even laughing too, but you're alone in the experience. What makes this behavior particularly insidious is how easily it can be disguised as just joking. That phrase, just joking, is often a weapon. It's a way to hurt someone and then escape accountability. It puts the blame on the person who got hurt. Why are you being so sensitive? It was just a joke. But the truth is, if it always hurts and never heals, it was never just a joke. People who consistently meet others' vulnerability with ridicule are often struggling with their own discomfort around emotions. They may fear closeness, feel threatened by sincerity, or be projecting their own shame, but that doesn't excuse the harm. It only explains the behavior, and explanations are not the same as permission. If you're constantly in a space where you can't be real without being mocked, it's worth asking why you're still there. What are you afraid of losing connection, approval, history, and more importantly, what are you losing every time you silence yourself to avoid being ridiculed? The truth is, love and friendship that are built on laughter at your expense are not safe spaces. They might feel familiar. They might even feel fun sometimes, but they are not emotionally honest, and you deserve more than that. You deserve connection where your feelings are held with care, not comedy, where your joy is celebrated and your pain respected. It's not about never joking. It's about knowing when the joke stops being funny. It's about knowing that laughter should never be a substitute for empathy, and that anyone who uses your honesty as material for their amusement is telling you something very clear. They aren't safe with your truth. So if you've ever felt small after sharing something big, if you've ever felt laughed at instead of listened to, trust that instinct. You're not overreacting. You're not fragile. You're simply responding to the loss of emotional safety. And emotional safety is not a luxury. It's a requirement. Without it, no real connection can exist. Imitation can be flattering when it's rooted in admiration, curiosity, or shared connection, but sometimes it crosses a line so subtle that at first you don't even realize it's been crossed. You say something and they repeat it back to you, but the tone is different. Their voice changes slightly. They exaggerate your words just enough to sound ridiculous. Maybe they even mimic the way you move your hands or the way your voice catches when you're nervous. Other people laugh. You force a smile. It feels like a joke, but something deeper inside you flinches. Because you know this isn't about playfulness. It's about power. When someone imitates you to mock you, it's not a moment of shared humor. It's a distancing move. It says, I'm not like you. I'm better than you. And here's proof. They take a part of you, hold it up like a costume, and perform it for an audience. It could be your tone of voice, a phrase you use often, a habit, a way of reacting under stress, whatever it is. It becomes material for ridicule. And each time they do it, they're not just mimicking your behavior, they're diminishing your identity. What makes this kind of mockery so painful is its intimacy. You only notice it because it's so specific. They don't just mock anyone they've picked you. They've studied your quirks, the patterns in your speech, the moments when you're most yourself. That level of attention once felt like closeness. Now it feels like a weapon. They've learned how you work, and now they're using that knowledge to unravel you, one sarcastic impression at a time. In those moments, the room often turns against you without even realizing it. Others might laugh. They might think it's harmless. They might even tell you you're lucky to be that important, to someone's humor, but what they don't feel is the sting of being turned into a character. You're no longer in the room as yourself. You've become a parody of yourself, and you didn't agree to it. That laughter is no longer shared joy, it's shared detachment. You're being separated from the group in a way that feels subtle but deeply cutting. And the worst part, you're told not to take it seriously, that it's all in fun, that you're being too sensitive. This is a classic deflection tactic, shifting the responsibility of discomfort onto the person who feels hurt. But here's the truth. Sensitivity is not weakness. Sensitivity is awareness. It's knowing when something feels off, when your voice is being used as a joke, when the parts of you that feel most natural are being turned into material for someone else's performance. Over time, this kind of behavior can be deeply corrosive to your sense of self. You begin to second guess your own natural expressions. Should I say that phrase? Should I laugh like that? Should I raise my hand in that way? You become hyper-aware of yourself, not in a confident way, but in a guarded way. You edit yourself not for clarity or kindness, but for protection. Your authenticity shrinks because someone else made a game out of it. This isn't just teasing. This is emotional undermining. It's the slow erosion of confidence in the parts of you that are unfiltered and true. It can happen in friendships, at work, in families, or in romantic relationships. And the damage often hides under a veneer of humor. But make no mistake, humor without empathy is cruelty in disguise. People who mock others through imitation often have unresolved insecurities of their own. They seek control through superiority. By turning you into a caricature, they create emotional distance. They don't have to feel vulnerable with you. They don't have to risk connection. They get to laugh and stay safe. But safety built on someone else's humiliation is not real safety. It's performance. So how do you respond? First, name it, quietly, internally, or with someone you trust. Name that this doesn't feel funny, that it feels targeted, that your words or movements or habits have become ammunition. That awareness gives you back some power. It helps you stop gaslighting yourself into believing this is normal or okay. Next, set a boundary. It doesn't have to be dramatic. Sometimes it's as simple as not laughing. Sometimes it's a gentle, firm comment like, "That actually doesn't feel great when you do that." Sometimes it's a decision to step away from the dynamic entirely. You don't owe prolonged exposure to people who make a joke out of your identity. You deserve spaces where your natural self isn't material for someone else's comedy routine. You deserve to be seen, not mimicked. To be respected, not reduced. You deserve connection that honors your humanity, not entertainment that feeds off it. Mockery dressed as humor is still mockery, and you are not too sensitive for noticing that. You are simply awake to the truth of how you want to be treated. They don't confront you directly. They don't ask questions. They don't check in. But then you start to hear things, fragments of conversations, strange looks from mutual friends, or a sudden change in the way people treat you. You wonder what's going on until eventually the pieces fall together. Someone's been telling a story about you, and it isn't the truth. Or at least not your truth, the most painful part, that someone is a person who once knew your heart. A person who had access to your fears, your dreams, your vulnerability. And now, they're using that intimacy to reconstruct a version of you that you don't recognize, one that's distorted, simplified, even vilified. The facts may be familiar, but the framing is not. They tell people what you said, but not why you said it. They recall your actions, but strip them of all context. They leave out everything that made you human and insert everything that makes you look like a villain. And the people listening, they don't know the full story. Maybe they don't want to. Maybe the version they hear is just compelling enough to believe. It has bite, it has drama, it gives them something to bond over. You become a topic, not a person, a name with a rumor attached. And suddenly, you find yourself on the outside of a narrative you never agreed to be part of. This kind of behavior isn't about honest conflict. It's about control. When someone rewrites your story and casts you as the enemy, they aren't seeking resolution. They're seeking validation for themselves from others. It's much easier to say, "They hurt me because they're selfish," than to say, "We were both trying and we failed each other." It's much easier to paint someone as cold than to admit, "We felt abandoned." So they reframe the ending, edit the dialogue, cut out the scenes where they were complicit, and give themselves the lead role in a one-sided tragedy. This is a kind of betrayal that isn't loud, but it's deep. It's not the betrayal of someone walking away. It's the betrayal of someone staying behind to rewrite the wreckage into a weapon. And it's almost always done under the illusion of innocence. They'll say they're just sharing their truth, that they're just telling people what happened, but the difference between truth and narrative is intention. When someone tells a story to seek connection, growth, or clarity, they invite complexity. But when they tell a story to seek revenge or superiority, they flatten it. They remove themselves from all responsibility and assign it all to you. You may feel the urge to defend yourself, to explain, to set the record straight, and there's a time and place for that. But more often than not, trying to correct someone else's narrative only entangles you deeper. Because the people who want to believe their version will believe it, no matter what you say, and the people who know your character don't need the whole story to stand with you. Still, the damage is real. It's not just about your reputation. It's about your relationship with your own story. You start to question yourself. Was I really that cold, that selfish, that manipulative? You play back conversations, moments, texts, trying to see yourself through their lens. You wonder if the story they're telling has a sliver of truth, and if that sliver is enough to define you forever. This is the emotional cost of being misrepresented by someone you once trusted. You begin to carry the weight of their resentment in addition to your own grief. And it's heavy, especially when you're still holding love for them, even as they use their voice to silence yours. It takes a fierce kind of self-compassion to resist internalizing their version of who you are, to say, "That is not my story, that is not my truth," and to return to your own voice even when it shakes. It takes courage to acknowledge your imperfections without letting them define you, to hold space for your own complexity when others are determined to reduce you. Sometimes the only way forward is to let go of the need to be understood by the person who's decided not to understand you. Sometimes it means choosing silence not because you're guilty, but because peace is more valuable than vindication. And sometimes it means writing your own story, not for revenge, not for validation, but for clarity, for healing, for truth. You are not the villain in everyone's narrative, even if someone tells it that way. You are a full, flawed, evolving human being, and anyone who tells a story that can't hold your humanity is not telling the truth. They're telling a version that serves their pain, and while their pain may be real, their version of you doesn't have to become your reality.